The day I came home wearing my uniform, my father looked at me the way he always had, like I was still the girl who needed to be managed. It wasn't cruelty exactly. That's what made it so hard to explain to people. He wasn't mean in the way that leaves visible marks. He was dismissive in the way that leaves you questioning whether you imagined it, whether you were being too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. My whole life, I had been too much of something for him. Too ambitious, too stubborn, too certain that I deserved a seat at tables he hadn't personally approved. I was 32 years old that spring. I had spent the last 9 years working my way through one of the most demanding career paths you can choose in this country, and I had done it without a single phone call from him asking how I was holding up. My mother had called. My grandmother had called, bless her, every Sunday without fail until she passed. My aunt had driven 4 hours through a snowstorm to see me graduate. But my father? He had sent a card. A card with a generic message he hadn't even bothered to write himself, just a signature at the bottom in his careful, controlled handwriting. Proud of you, Dad. 3 words. No punctuation after the dash. As if he had measured out exactly how much warmth he was willing to spend on me, and decided 3 words was the appropriate amount. I don't know when I stopped being his daughter, and started being his disappointment. If I had to guess, I'd say it was around the time I was 15 and told him I wanted to study sciences instead of business. He had built his career in finance. Small firm, good reputation, nothing flashy but nothing to be ashamed of either. He had a plan for me. A plan he had never consulted me about, but a plan nonetheless. Business degree, articling somewhere respectable. Maybe law if I was serious enough. Something that made sense. Something he could explain to his colleagues at the golf club without having to pause and find the right words. I chose a different path. He never fully forgave me for it. My mother understood, or tried to. She was the one who drove me to orientation, who mailed me home-cooked food in containers that somehow survived Canada Post, who texted me at 11 at night when she knew I was studying for exams. She was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they've learned that speaking up in certain rooms costs too much. I used to resent that about her. I understood it better now. That spring morning, I drove to their house in Oakville, the same house I had grown up in, the same maple tree in the front yard, the same driveway with the crack along the left side, that my father kept saying he'd get fixed, and I sat in the car for a few minutes before I went in. I was in uniform because I had come directly from a briefing. I hadn't had time to change. And honestly, I told myself I hadn't had time to change. Which was maybe 70% true and 30% something I didn't want to examine too closely. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She always knew when I was outside. She pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual, and over her shoulder I could see my father in the hallway, coffee in hand, looking at me the way he looked at things he wasn't sure belonged. You look tired, he said, not hello. Not good to see you. You look tired. I'm fine, I said. It's been a busy few weeks. I imagine. He turned back toward the kitchen. Your mother made eggs. That was it. That was the greeting. 9 years of building something real and I got your mother made eggs. We ate breakfast the way we always did when I visited, my mother asking questions, my father answering questions about himself when given the opening, and me existing somewhere in the middle, saying enough to seem present without expecting anything in return. He talked about a renovation project they were planning. He talked about a friend from his firm who had just retired. He mentioned briefly that my cousin had gotten a promotion, and he said it with this particular warmth in his voice that I had spent years trying to earn and never quite managed to. My cousin worked in commercial real estate. He was 28, drove a BMW he could barely afford, and called our grandmother twice a year at most. My father thought he was exceptional. I didn't say anything. I had stopped saying things about that a long time ago. After breakfast, my mother and I sat on the back deck with tea while my father went to his study. He always had something to do in his study. When I was a teenager, I used to think it was work. Later, I realized it was simply what he did when social interaction had exceeded his comfortable limit. He retreated. He organized. He controlled the environment in a room where he was the only person who mattered. He's proud of you, my mother said. She said it the way she always said it, quietly, with her eyes on the yard, as if she was saying it to the garden. I know, I said, because arguing felt pointless, and because some part of me still, at 32 years old, wanted to believe it was true. The event was 3 weeks later. A recognition dinner at the Fairmont in downtown Toronto. The kind of event that gets planned 12 months in advance. The kind with assigned seating and a printed program, and people who fly in from Ottawa and Vancouver specifically to attend. I had known about it for months. I had not mentioned it to my father because I knew exactly what would happen if I did, which is to say, nothing. He would nod. He would say that's nice. He would find a reason why he and my mother were busy that weekend. My mother knew. She had known for 2 months. She had bought a new dress and everything. She was the one, in the end, who told him. Told him in the way she told him things she knew he wouldn't engage with properly by mentioning it as they were going to bed, in the dark. When he was half asleep and couldn't formulate a full objection, he came. I don't know what she said to him exactly, but he came. I found out when she texted me that afternoon. We're on our way. Your father is wearing his good suit. She followed it with a small heart emoji. My mother had discovered emojis the previous Christmas and had not used them sparingly since. I read the text in the car. I was sitting in the back of a black SUV that the organization had arranged, being driven along the Gardiner, watching the lake glitter in the late afternoon light. I put my phone in my lap and looked out the window for a while. I didn't know how to feel. I had spent so many years wanting him there for things, graduations, milestones, the ordinary moments that become extraordinary when someone you love is watching, and he had missed so many of them. And now he was coming to this one, the biggest one. And I was sitting there trying to figure out if I was relieved or terrified. Maybe both. Maybe that's just what it feels like when you've stopped expecting something, and it happens anyway. The Fairmont lobby was already full when I arrived. There were people in formal dress everywhere, familiar faces from the field, people I had worked alongside for years, and people I knew only by reputation. I made my way through slowly, stopping to speak to a few colleagues, watching the room fill with the particular kind of energy that comes when a lot of driven people are in the same space for an occasion that matters. I spotted my parents near the entrance to the banquet hall. My mother saw me first. Her face did something it always did when she was proud of me, and trying not to make too much of it. A kind of controlled brightness, like she was holding a light steady so it wouldn't spill. She squeezed my hands when I reached her, and didn't say anything for a moment, which told me everything. My father looked at my uniform, at the name on my chest. His expression was careful in that way of his. Not unfriendly, but measured. Managed. Quite a venue, he said. It is, I agreed. Your mother has been talking about this all week. My mother laughed softly and looked away. We went inside. We found our seats. Mine was at the head table, which I explained to them before they were directed there by a program coordinator, because I didn't want my father to find out in front of strangers. Or maybe I did. I'm still not entirely sure what I wanted in that moment. He looked at the seating chart. He looked at me. He said, head table? Yes, I said. He didn't say anything else. He and my mother were seated at a table near the front. Good seats, close to the stage, seats that had been set aside for family. Someone from the organization had handled that. Someone had made sure my parents would be close enough to see clearly. I hadn't asked them to do that. They had done it because of who I was in that room, in that context. And my father, who had spent 32 years deciding who was worth seeing clearly, had been placed there by someone who already knew. I went to the head table. I took my seat. I looked out at the room and found my mother's face almost immediately. She was watching me with that steady, held light expression. And beside her, my father, looking at the program in his hands. He was reading it. Really reading it. I could tell by the way he had gone still. I should tell you what the evening was actually for. I don't say that to impress anyone. I've learned to be careful about how I talk about this kind of thing, because there's a version of it that sounds like bragging, and that's not what I'm after. I'm after something more honest than that. I worked in emergency management, federal level, with a focus on natural disaster response and interagency coordination. The kind of work that is largely invisible until something goes wrong, and then it is extremely visible. And the visibility is never welcome because it means something terrible has happened somewhere. I had spent nearly a decade building systems, training teams, flying into situations that other people were flying out of. I had worked floods in the interior, ice storms in the Maritimes, a wildfire season in Alberta that I still sometimes dream about. Not because the work was glamorous, it wasn't. It was bureaucratic and exhausting, and sometimes heartbreaking. But it was necessary, and I was good at it, and I had spent 9 years becoming better at it than I had ever thought I'd be. The dinner was to mark a national recognition. I had been named that year's recipient of an award given to professionals in public safety and emergency services who had demonstrated sustained leadership over their careers. It was the kind of thing that doesn't happen often, and doesn't come with a lot of fanfare ahead of time, and when it does come, it tends to arrive when you're busy doing something else entirely and not thinking about awards at all. I had been in a debrief meeting in Ottawa when the call came. I had thanked the caller, asked them to email the details, and then gone back into the debrief, because there were still 40 minutes on the agenda, and the agenda wasn't going to wait. That's the work. That's always the work. My father did not know the specifics of what I did. Not really. He knew the general shape of it: government work, emergency services, some kind of coordination role. In the same way that people know the general shape of things they have never asked about in detail. He had never asked, and I had stopped offering more than the surface version years ago. What was the point? He would nod. He would say that sounds complicated. He would ask if the hours were reasonable. But he was reading the program now. I could see it from inside the room. His head was down, and he was reading, and my mother had put her hand on his arm the way she did when she was waiting for something. The evening moved forward the way these evenings do. Welcome remarks, recognition of colleagues and partners, a keynote from someone senior in the public service who was gracious and specific and had clearly actually read my file. And then the main presentation. They called my name. My full name, with the title I had worked 9 years to earn. And the room responded the way rooms respond when everyone in it knows what that name means in that context. I walked to the stage. I said what I had prepared to say, and then departed from it a little, the way you do when you're in a room full of people who understand the work, and you realize the prepared remarks are less true than the unrehearsed ones. I talked about my team. I talked about the people I had learned from. I said something about the Albertan wildfire season that made a few people in the room go quiet in a way that told me they had been there too. I did not look at my father while I spoke. I had decided before I walked up that I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to be 32 years old on a stage in the Fairmont, looking to my father for something I had stopped needing years ago. I was going to speak to the room. I was going to speak to the work. But afterward, after the applause, after the handshakes, after the photographs with colleagues I genuinely admired, I found them again. My mother was on her feet before I reached the table. She hugged me for a long time and didn't say anything, and I felt her exhale slowly against my shoulder. And that was enough. That was more than enough. My father stood up when she let go of me. He was holding the program, the page with my name on it, and the description of the award, and the paragraph about my career that someone had written, and that I had approved 3 months ago without paying much attention to. He looked at me for a long moment. I didn't know. His voice was quieter than usual. I didn't know it was like this. I didn't ask what this was. I understood what he meant. He meant the room, the people, the weight of what they had said about me from the stage. He meant the paragraph in the program. He meant 9 years of a life he hadn't looked at closely enough to understand. I nodded. I didn't cry, though I came close, and not for the reasons you might expect. Not from joy, not from vindication, but from something more complicated, something that felt like grief and relief at the same time. Like losing and finding something in the same moment. Like realizing that what you wanted and what you needed had quietly become 2 different things somewhere along the way, and you hadn't noticed the exact moment when it happened. I know you didn't, I said. We stood there for a moment in the noise of the room, the 2 of us, while my mother pretended to look for something in her purse. I want to be honest about what happened next, because there's a version of this story where I say something perfectly composed. Something that wraps everything up neatly and makes it clear that I had healed, that I had grown beyond it, that his recognition finally gave me peace, and that version would be cleaner. It would probably feel more satisfying, but what actually happened is that I felt tired. That's the truest thing I can say. I felt tired in the way you feel tired when you've been holding something for a very long time, and you're not sure you're ready to put it down yet, because you've been holding it for so long that it's become part of how you carry yourself. I'm glad you came, I said. And I meant it, even with everything complicated underneath it. I genuinely meant it. He nodded. He folded the program once, carefully, along the crease and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, the good suit pocket. I watched him do it and didn't say anything. My mother looked up from her purse. Her eyes were bright. She smiled at me over his shoulder, and it was the smile she used when she was trying very hard not to say I told you so. Not to him, to the situation itself. She had known who I was for years. She had always known. We stayed for another hour. My father shook hands with 2 of my colleagues who came to say hello, and he asked them questions, actual questions, not polite noise, about what the work involved. I watched him from a few feet away, talking to people who knew me in the context of everything I had built, and I watched something shift in his face. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, just a small, quiet recalibration, like someone adjusting their footing on uneven ground. He drove my mother home. I stayed to close out the evening with a few colleagues and then took a cab back to my hotel. It was past 11 when I got to my room. I took off my jacket and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the city lights through the window. He called the next morning. Earlier than he usually called. On the rare occasions he called at all. I was still in bed when my phone went off, and I saw his name on the screen and lay there for a moment before I answered. "Good morning," he said. "Morning." A pause. He was never comfortable with silences, but this one lasted longer than usual, which told me he had decided to let it breathe a little. "I looked up some of the projects," he said. "From your work, the response coordination, the Alberta deployment. I found some of the official reports." I didn't say anything. "I didn't realize the scope of it," he said. "The scale." "I didn't," he stopped. Started again. "You've been doing important work." I should have known more about it. Should have. 2 words. Not an apology exactly, but the shape of one. The outline of one at least. I had spent a long time imagining what I would say if he ever gave me an opening like that. I had rehearsed things. Not consciously, but in the way you rehearse things you don't intend to rehearse. In the shower, driving long stretches of highway, lying awake in unfamiliar hotels in cities where something had gone wrong, and I was there to help fix it. I had whole speeches, entire catalogs of things I had wanted to say for years. I didn't say any of them. "Thank you for coming last night," I said. "It meant something to me that you were there." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have been at more things," he said. "I know that." And that was it. That was all. No orchestrated moment, no dramatic reckoning. Just a man in his 60s, calling his daughter early on a Sunday morning, having read official government reports about her work the night before, trying to find his way to something he didn't quite have the vocabulary for yet. I told him I had to get ready to check out. He said, "Of course." He said to drive safe when I headed back. He said, and this one caught me off guard. "Even now, I'm proud of you. For real this time." I didn't ask what he meant by for real this time. I think I understood. I've thought about that year a lot since then. About what it means to spend a decade becoming someone. And about how much of that process is invisible to the people who were supposed to be watching from the beginning. About the particular loneliness of succeeding in rooms where the people who made you, or who were supposed to make you, have no idea what room you're in. I don't tell this story to say, my father was a bad person. He wasn't. He was a limited person who had built a life around a specific idea of what mattered, and I didn't fit neatly into that idea. And he didn't know how to value what he couldn't immediately categorize. A lot of people are like that. A lot of fathers are like that, and a lot of daughters spend years absorbing the cost of it and calling it normal. What I know now that I didn't know at 15 or 22 or even 30 is that his limitations were never a verdict on me. His inability to see me clearly didn't make me less visible. It just meant he was looking with the wrong lens, and I spent way too long trying to adjust myself to fit a lens that was never designed for me. The work I do isn't about recognition. It never has been. It's about the moment when a system holds, when a plan executes, when people get home safe, who might not have without the groundwork that was laid quietly by unglamorous people in offices and meeting rooms that nobody films. That's the part that matters. That's always been the part that matters. My father knows that now, I think. We talk more than we used to. Not easily. We don't slide into conversation the way some parents and children do, but more honestly. He asks about my work in a way that tells me he's been paying attention. He remembered a deployment I mentioned in passing 4 months ago. He sent me an article he had read about emergency preparedness reform that he thought I might find relevant. Small things. The kind of small things that would have seemed unremarkable from anyone else, and that, from him, were the closest thing to fluency we had ever managed. My mother still calls every Sunday. She doesn't miss. She sent me a photo recently of the two of them at some neighborhood event, standing in front of a table my father had organized for his local community association. He's been volunteering there since he retired. My mother said he tells people his daughter works in emergency management at the federal level, and then tells them more than they probably wanted to know about what that actually means. I read that text on a Tuesday evening, sitting in my office in Ottawa with a cold cup of coffee and 3 unread briefing notes waiting screen. I laughed out loud, alone in my office, in a way that surprised me. Laughed until my eyes went a little blurry, which I refused to call crying. I closed the message and went back to the briefing notes. There was work to do. There is always work to do. That part never changes, and I've made my peace with that. More than made my peace. I've built my life around it, and it turned out, in the end, that the life I built was exactly enough. It was more than enough. It was mine.